Ladies and gentlemen, there is an escalation in Middle East, and right now the Houthis have joined in and potentially choke the last lifeline of the Middle East oil flow. And let's just watch on to see what are the happenings right now in Middle East and the possible ramification for this event. So as I said, this is a major war escalation. The Houthis from Yemen has started attacking, and they are clearly a proxy of the Iranians. So right now, the Iranians now choke the entire oil trade and potentially ransom not just the United States, the Israelis, but also the rest of the world. So these are developing news. Remember, hit subscribe. We are now in decline territory for the stock market. Potentially many opportunities are now emerging. You don't want to miss it. So remember, hit subscribe and let's go. So right now we have a dual choke point war underway. The Strait of Hormuz is already being choked by the Iranians, and even friendly countries to Iran, their vessels have been turned away, meaning that Chinese vessel is now surprisingly been turned away, and we thought that they are all friendly to the Chinese. So now we also now have a second development. The Houthis have entered the war. They fired missiles at Israel and potentially choked the other only straits that could clear some of the oil that's coming from the Middle East. First of all, we need to understand who are the Houthis. The Houthis is a military group that's based in Yemen, and they are founded in 1990s. They started as a religious political movement, and they gained a lot of momentum. In 2014, about 10 plus years ago, they seized the capital of Yemen, and they now basically controls more than 70 to 75% of the population of Yemen. They are not the internationally recognized political group of Yemen, but they certainly control almost the whole of Yemen. So this is quite an interesting and powerful group. And more importantly, they have powerful military capability. They now have missiles, they have cruise missiles, they have ballistic missiles, they have drones, and they are certainly a large group of military power, and they are strategically located far away from Israel, so it's difficult for Israel to send troops to attack them. And as a result, we are seeing them taking more participation right now in this war as they started attacking Israel. Now, talking about attacking Israel, they have fired so far 2 missiles at Israel. Fortunately, both were being intercepted, and they now have officially entered the war. And while the escalation is still initial phase, they have outright said that they could potentially choke the straits that they control. Let's now take a look at the straits. It's called the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and it's the southern gate of the Saudi Arabia oil. Now, first of all, let's understand this. We have the Straits of Hormuz that is now being choked. Initially, 20% of the world's supply goes through the Straits of Hormuz, which is here. Iran, which is on the north of the straits, now controls the choke point, and they refuse to let ships pass through right now, and therefore stranglehold the world supply of oil from the region. Now, interestingly, this is Saudi Arabia. They are a major oil producer of the world, and they do have a pipeline, which I'll talk about shortly, that runs through the country, and they pass through these straits called the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. Now, this strait is controlled by Yemen. Now, you can see Yemen here, and unfortunately, this straits right now is being threatened by the Houthis because Houthis controls Yemen, and the Yemenis are more or less a proxy military group of Iran, and they now know that oil could pass through here and they potentially choke here. These straits here accounts for about 10 to 12% of the world's oil shipment. And this is quite serious to have first 20% of oil shipment here being choked. Now 10% of the world oil shipment now also get choked. That's really a serious disaster. Now, just to let you know, ever since the start of the war, the Saudis have activated this pipeline called the East-West Crude Oil Pipeline that runs 1,200 kilometers across the Saudi Arabia. This pipe was built 40 over years ago. And fortunately for this pipeline, they could pump a lot of oil over to the Yanbu port. And from here, you could sail out through the straits that goes through Yemen. And as a result, the world actually gets some relief. This pipeline roughly replaces about 20 to 30% of the lost 20 to 30% of the lost oil shipment that's going through here. This is one of the key reasons why the oil prices haven't shoot up to the moon. Now, just to put some geography into perspective, previously the oil could go through the Straits of Hormuz, and all the GCC country, the Gulf country, most of their oil goes through here, and they sail all the way down, goes through the Straits of Malacca, come to Singapore. From Singapore goes to Hong Kong and to the rest of the world in terms of Korea, Japan, and China. So this represents the oil trade, and this has always been smooth and good. Ever since the start of the war, the Straits of Hormuz has been shut down effectively, and that proves to be a disaster for many countries around the region that cannot export oil. And as a result, the recipient of this oil also get hit, which is essentially Southeast Asia and Asia. Fortunately, as I said earlier, Saudi Arabia has a crude oil pipeline that runs from this place to this place. And if you can see, the pipeline runs through here, and they could now sail, the ships could now sail from here and bring oil out of it. So this is a relief line. It doesn't replace the entire flow of oil from the whole region here, but at least Saudi Arabia, being one of the most biggest producer of oil, managed to ship through this part. Now, this place is where the straits is now being potentially threatened and potentially being choked. And if this were to happen, then we have a disaster. Well, fortunately, on the north here is the Suez Canal. Theoretically, you could actually, instead of coming down here, bring the ship up here and sail out. So instead of going south eastwards, you basically go northwest and go through the Suez Canal. But unfortunately, this also means that you have to go a much longer way. Instead of 8,000 nautical miles to reach Singapore, it now has to go 11 nautical miles. Now, I'm not a sailor myself. I don't know much about shipping. But what I do know is that this brings a much longer route and a much costlier path. So you have a logistic nightmare because it's much a longer route. You add potentially weeks to the voyage because you now have to travel around the southern African coast. And now, because so many ships are now being forced to take a longer route, you now have more ships being engaged and less ships being available to do the work. And as a result, the freight costs will go higher. And as a result, oil prices will go on to be much higher and higher and higher. So the Houthis now threaten to attack ships that are now going through these straits of Bab el-Mandeb. So if they start attacking here, well, the only path the ships here that can go through, instead of going down south, they will go north. As you can see, it's a much longer path. So with the Houthis now entering the war, there are many consequences. Number one, the conflict now gets much wider. It is no longer just a regional war. It is a much bigger regional war right now. And Iran gains more control over the oil trade through proxies, and it doesn't need to pay the cost of direct enforcement because the Houthis already have a lot of weapons. And the Houthis do not need to engage in serious war. They just need to strike one tanker, and as a result, the straits will effectively stop moving. So shipping prices become very expensive, and the backup route through Suez Canal, it's a big workaround and it's very painful. So right now, we have a serious crisis that we no longer just have one choke point and potentially a second choke point. This is a global crisis of a metamorph scale. And right now, we're all watching to see whether the Iranians will trigger the Houthis to tighten the grip. Now, clearly, they are signaling to the Americans and the Israelis, don't go too far. While meanwhile, the Americans are being stuck. They can't pull out. If they pull out, the Iranians control the whole straits and all the Gulf countries become subordinate to the Iranians in the oil trade. Now, if the Americans were to attack, they need boots on the ground. They need to sacrifice precious American lives and a lot of precious American dollars. And that's something that Donald Trump wouldn't like to do. And the Iranians are not talking, they are not engaging. Certainly, this put Donald Trump and his administration in a tough fix. So the situation looks very bad for the Americans, and potentially this would also mean very bad for the rest of the world in terms of the oil prices. So right now, this is something that we are watching very closely. It doesn't look very good no matter how you see it. So this is a story that's developing. It is still unfolding. I would suggest everybody hit subscribe to my channel. Don't miss a single development. And this could represent major economic deterioration or a stock market downswing, and maybe even an opportunity for those people who are like me looking towards crash buying opportunities. So hit subscribe as I update you. Tonight, we're most likely going to have a live stream and we can engage and chat on this topic again. Okay? See you tonight. Bye-bye.